We do have a quorum, and I know we're waiting for two board members. Mr. Martinez is pending, and Mr. Holman, Dr. Holman. But nevertheless, we'll start this meeting. Today is August 3rd. It's 1:35 p.m. This is a workshop. We're going to cover several items today. So the meeting's been called to order. Let's please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Pledge the Texas flag. I want to lead us in the Texas flag.
I don't know.
Where's the Maryland?
Pledge allegiance to the one state under God.
Thank you, Mayor, for talking through that. We appreciate that. At this time, I'd like to recognize a moment of silence, please. Thank you. At this time, do we have any public comments? No public comments. Okay, so we'll move right into the agenda. The first item on the agenda, I'm sure all the board members have seen it. We're going to have a discussion about assignments. Every board member is assigned a certain, to a committee. I don't know if y'all have seen it. We have the Audit Committee, Compensation Committee, Facilities Program Committee, Regulatory Policy Committee. We have the members that are on the board right now are currently assigned. That information is in your packet. The Audit Committee is made up of myself, Mr. Sampaio, and there's a vacancy. The Compensation Committee is headed by Dr. Joseph Holman. There's a vacancy on that committee, and I'm also serving on that committee. The Facilities Program Committee is currently not headed by a chair. It's vacant. There's two vacancies on that committee. I am part of that committee. We have a Finance Committee that's headed by Mr. Sampaio, myself, and Dr. Holman. We have a Regulatory Policy Committee. The current chair is vacant. And there's a second vacancy, and I'm also part of that committee. Our joint subcommittee with the City of Brownsville is made up of our Mayor, John Cowan, Mr. Sampaio, Dr. Joseph Holman, Commissioner Roy De Los Santos, and Commissioner Pedro Cardenas. Southwest Regional Water Authority is currently being chaired by Dr. Joseph Holman. And of course, he's the entitled president. I just wanted to share this with all the members of this board. I like our input. We can discuss it and make committee assignments at a later date. And hoping Mr. Martinez will be here soon, and Dr. Holman. And I'd like any input from y'all on what committees you might be interested in. Right now, I'm going to leave it as is until I receive some feedback from all the members, and then we'll fill those in, and I'll submit them to administration, and then we'll distribute them.
Can you explain the Regulatory and Policy Committee?
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes, on the Regulatory and Policy Committee, we have a lot of policies of the PUB board. So there's two functions on there. One is the regulatory, the lobbyists, the things that we do at the state and at the federal level. So that's the regulatory piece of it. And then the policy is the actual PUB policies. There's over 30 HR policies. Some of them are very outdated. They're over 20 years old. They need to be updated. Some of them we've been bringing to the board, and they have recently been updated as well. So all the charter committee bylaws have been updated. So they're all up to speed. They were updated about 2 months ago. And so that would be also the policy committee and regulatory committee would be the one that would be addressing all the changes and how the PUB governance is.
Mr. Gilbert, also add to that, the frequency of committees, calling a meeting, or chair calling a meeting.
So I'll share right now, for example, Mr. Sampaio chairs one of the committees and he meets regularly once a month unless the schedule of the board members does not allow for it. It's up to the chair of each committee to decide if it's going to be a quarterly committee. I believe also, and the audit committee person is our internal auditor, that is quarterly. So that is currently meeting quarterly. And so if we want to be a regular policy committee monthly meeting, that can be. And so you have the leeway or on an as-needed basis to when the policies are ready to come for a board. The intent of everything that goes to the committees is to help expedite the meetings. So that way at the committee level, 3 board members that are there, they're all publicly posted. So any member of the team can be there present to hear. And so that way, if they want to defer for all the details to be brought up and they could be in accordance to the policy for any of the members who attended any of those meetings, items will go quicker when they come before the board.
And I apologize for my voice, but have the charters been distributed to the new board members, or have they had access to that?
Yes.
Yeah.
We provided a new board member packet orientation. Everybody should have seen something like this. I believe that we did notice that maybe some of the charters were maybe not the updated ones, but if you have them with you, we are ready to exchange them out to provide the most current ones.
What I would suggest there is giving the new board members an opportunity to look through those charters and maybe some of the agendas or minutes for those meetings.
Okay.
Just as a suggestion, I mean, we've got 3 new board members and they all have multiple strengths. I would suggest giving them an opportunity to take a dive into what those committees have looked at in the past and perhaps talk to Marilyn or staff regarding priorities in the future. And that way, based on their strengths, maybe they can submit a list of committee assignments that they'd like to be on. Just given that we have so much information out there that I don't know if they've had a chance to digest, but it's a lot. And I think the committees are an important part of the way this board works.
I appreciate those comments and they're noted. Marilyn, how many members need to be present for a committee?
We typically have them as 3 members, and I'm going to defer right now to council with the quorum of the committee. We've had conversations of that a little bit, so he can define a little bit more.
So the question being, how many members do we have to have? Is that the question for a committee?
For the committee meetings.
I don't think it's just set by policy. So it can be 2, 3. It doesn't really make a difference. I mean, the only concern we have to make is if we're posting them as we should. So, I mean, really the only limitation is just the whole board for all intents and purposes. If we're posting them, it's just set by the amount of folks that want to participate on that subcommittee.
All right, I just want to clear that up. If a committee chair calls for a meeting and only one person is able to attend, they can move forward with that meeting.
Can you repeat the question?
If a committee chair calls for a meeting and only one member is able to attend, then they continue with that meeting and have discussions.
If the set committee if there's not a quorum of the set committee, then you would following the normal procedures, would not have a meeting. You wouldn't have minutes. You wouldn't have a full committee meeting. So you would have to continue it. So if it's Dr. Holman, Mr. Nahara, and Mr. Rendon, and only Mr. Nahara can attend, then it wouldn't be a meeting because you would not have a quorum present for that meeting to take place.
Could you do it with 2 members?
You could do it with 2 members,
Okay. Just for clarification.
which I think we have done in the past.
Yes.
Well, I'm interested in the facilities and program committee.
We appreciate that. Ms. Dr. Zamora is interested in the facilities and program committee. Okay. Dr. Holman, we're talking about committee assignments, about the current assignments that we're all on.
Want any more?
We're talking about that. We're letting the new board members kind of process this and see what interest they may have and what committees they may want to serve on. I know Dr. Zamora just mentioned that she's interested in the facilities program committee. I think all the committees right now, there's openings, there's vacancies. Mr. Martinez, Good to see you here. I'm sorry, I didn't say it. Thank you. So, Tony, 2 members of the subcommittee constitutes membership to continue with the meeting. The 2 members
Mhm.
can continue with the meeting. If one
Yes.
member shows up, we cannot have.
Right,
a meeting.
they wouldn't have a quorum.
So as we move forward, I'd like all the members to take a good look. Again, we're already assigned. I won't read them out again. The members that are still here, Mr. Sampaio, Dr. Holman, myself, we're already assigned on some boards. So I'd love to hear from y'all, any input on what committee you'd like to serve on. Marilyn, what is our next item there?
So one of the items also under item number 1 is I'd like to understand what your time limitations for today are, because we do have some required training to meet the Texas Open Meetings Act. And so with that is, if you have a hard stop, let's say at 3:00, then we can reassign and redo various different things out of order. It is up to the chair to decide.
I've already received some input on that topic, and I'm thinking if we can get to 4:00, 4:15, this one to be.
I did have a question for all the board members. I'm assuming there's several of you, but how many of you all have not had the Open Meetings Act training? If I could just one, okay.
Formal training?
The Open Meetings Act training?
What is it though?
The Texas Open Meetings Act training as part of the Charter Review Committee. I think both Dr. Zamora and Mr. Martinez were part of the Charter Review Committee.
But it wasn't an official training. I don't know what you mean by training.
Did you get educated on the Texas Open Meetings Act?
Educated, yes, but it was not anything formal. It was not certificate, no.
There was no certificate? Okay, that's what I needed to know.
I got a certificate either, actually.
Well, certificate is a loose term. Do you have something hanging on your wall? No, you do not. We can talk about that, but there is a required 1-hour training, which is what we are intending to do. So if you guys did not receive a 1-hour training, and if you don't remember it, that tells me enough. So we have 3 members that need it. So we can do that at the end if we have a hard stop for anybody today and do the regular agenda and have the Open Meetings Act training.
They can also do that online.
And that was my next comment, was that if somebody cannot attend and cannot stay till a certain point, we can make sure that you all get the training necessary online. And there is a link in the materials that you've been provided in your board effect packet that has the link to those materials. We just need confirmation that it has been done.
Cody, tell us a little bit about that online training. It's
The-
not online for about 5 minutes.
It's an hour, it is an hour-long training, and you will be an hour-long training with me today too, if we all want to participate in that. So it is required by law that you all receive an hour-long training on the Texas Open Meetings Act.
So it will be after the meeting, we can do it.
This is part of the scheduled training today as the agenda, but we have other materials that need to begin going over with regards to educating on PUB in general. But as far as the time limits are concerned for purposes of your Open Meetings Act training, it needs to be completed within 90 days of your appointment. Based on my recollection, you all still have some time on that, so we can accomplish that today. Or if you want, we can set up separate time between the 3 of you to either watch the video or do it with me personally. It's really up to your all's discretion.
Marilyn, I'd like to perhaps push that one up front. And Dr. Holman, I can get recertified. I don't have my certificate.
I don't think it hurts to have a refresher for all of us who, maybe have done it and consider a certificate.
We can get you a certificate. Marilyn and I had that conversation today. If it's framed, it costs extra.
All right, Marilyn, given our agenda.
And I think I have something to add. I believe under chapter 38, all board members need to have ethics training as well.
Right, and we have that have provision. We have that part of the training as well.
Okay, so that's included, just to
Yeah.
confirm. Okay, thank you.
Well,
So with that, we'll start and we'll keep with the agenda the way it is. Well, it sounds like everybody wants to go through the 1-hour Cody 90-page presentation. And
Are you sure some of us have already gone through it, so.
those of you
And-
that have gone through it can.
if you want,
Well, that's what, where we're trying to accommodate folks on their time limitations.
I think it's best,
So you-
if we focus on the strategic matters up front, I think it's best to have the training at the end or at.
As long as we allocate one hard hour.
Okay,
All right.
So-
And
At the end means, that's what I want to know what that means at the end. 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock.
It doesn't matter, I think.
I'm
I'm
thinking
willing
7
to
or
stay.
8.
And to the extent that there are any other appointed individuals in the attendance today that want to attend, they can get their certification today as well.
Okay, we'll leave this. We'll leave 1 hour. We're looking at maybe 4:30.
okay.
Yeah, 50.
So with that in mind, what I'll do is, if with your permission, it's a workshop, so it's not like a regular schedule. So we're going to take the item number 2 out of order. We'll move
Okay.
it to the end. So then that way, for those of you who wants to attend to other business, can leave and depart the Open Meetings Act training portion piece.
Okay,
So,
that's fine.
and we'll jump, if okay, to item number 3, and then we'll come back and visit item number 2.
Okay.
So item number 3 happens to be the power supply presentation. Some of you have seen a little bit of this information, but given the fact that we have 4 new board members on our board, we have right now with us Ms. Lina Alvarez and Mr. Glenn Justice. And they're going to be going over the power supply presentation backup. We have 2 items on this one when there is an open and closed session piece, and some of it is competitive and sensitive in nature. So we'll convene to closed session when we get to that piece of the information.
Can you all hear me? Good afternoon. My name is Lina Alvarez. I am Brownsville Public Utilities Board Energy Risk Manager. Today, we'll be giving you a power supply workshop, and with me is Glenn Justice.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the board. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today. We do know you have a very tight agenda with a lot of material. So, and we, as I'm sure you observed, we have both an open session portion and then a closed session portion, depending on if we get to that or not. What we thought we would do is, for sake of time, just kind of go through an abbreviated version of the open session material. We're happy to answer any questions you may have with regard to the slides. But we thought we would just hit some of the key points with respect to the open session material, if that's okay. So in the open session, what we wanted to cover is just give you some introductory information, talk a little bit about an overview. This is for those that are interested in a refresher, but also those that may be new to this topic, of some of the general aspects of how ERCOT operates. We'll really focus a lot of that item on the distinction between reliability versus economic issues. I'll talk a little bit about market prices and then give you a high-level preview of the draft power supply strategy that has been developed so far. And we'll then, if we have time, we'll provide more details of the competitively sensitive information in closed session. But the capstone piece of information we wanted to share is consistent with prudent utility practices. Brownsville PUB must plan for future power supply resources. And the purpose of this workshop is to not make a decision now, but to lay the groundwork for future power supply decisions that you should probably make in the next year or so. The workshop is purely informational. We're not asking for any particular board decisions. We're not making any particular recommendations at this time, other than to consider various things. As I mentioned, competitively sensitive portions of the workshop will be in closed session. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lina, and she's going to cover the bulk of the rest of the open session material, and then I will wrap up.
So the U.S. is served by 3 separately operated electrical grids. On the right-hand side, you can see the Eastern Interconnect. On the left is the Western Interconnect. And then most of Texas is covered by ERCOT. So ERCOT operates the grid in Texas and is responsible for power supply adequacy. In other words, ERCOT serves as the balancing authority. What is that? Well, this is the entity that's responsible to make sure that we're maintaining balance between production and consumption. And they ensure that sufficient generation is online and available to meet demand. How does the grid work? Well, first of all, let me just run you through the regular process of electricity and the way it's generated. It starts in a generation station, then it travels through transmission lines, which are in blue, and then it meets or goes through a substation where there's a step-down transformer that actually moves or changes the distribution of the voltage to a level that customers can actually use. How does ERCOT does this? Well, they do this, everything that has to do with the physical operations, the market operations, and the cost allocations through an extensive set of protocols. More detail on that can actually be found on the ERCOT website on ERCOT.com for your reference. ERCOT is pretty complex, and it involves many layers. To simplify it for you, PUCT is the oversight for ERCOT, and you can see that on the right-hand side on the top. And then ERCOT deals directly with the qualifying scheduling entity, which in our case is Tenaska Power Services. And then the qualifying scheduling entity deals directly with the load serving entity. BPUB is a load serving entity. And the load serving entity works with the resource entity and the customer as well. BPUB is actually a resource entity, is a transmission service provider, a distribution service provider, and it deals with the customers as well. So BPUB is actually an LSC. We own generation, we own transmission lines, and we own distribution lines as well. Just to give you a little info on this, there's a lot of other utilities that are only transmission service providers or distribution service providers. In our case, we have all three of them.
Okay, sorry. So you're saying that we are all of the ones at the bottom, the four?
That is correct, yes. BPUB is a load serving entity on the left. And it's also a resource entity, a transmission service provider, and a distribution service provider. So the way I try to explain it is we own generation, everything travels through transmission, all the generation, all the electricity goes through transmission lines, and then it goes through distribution lines, and then it gets to the customer. We own all of this portion right here. And we are considered a load serving entity. So we have to abide by all the regulations that exist on the ERCOT protocols for the LSE, for the RE, for the TSP, as well as the DSP. But that's not the case for all the utilities. Okay, so why do we own generation? Well, while reliability benefits can occur in limited circumstances, the main reason why we own generation has to do primarily to the economics. What do we do with this generation? We hedge against power price risk. So we consider it to be prudent to maintain some level of local generation. To give you a better explanation on that, there's no one price on ERCOT. There are many prices in ERCOT. All these dots that you see here, they're a separate price on each generation node. The way ERCOT works is they have a program that is called SCED, and it's a mathematical model or mechanism to generate the pricing, the most economical generation dispatch order while considering transmission constraints and considering generation limitations. So all these red dots are LMPs or locational marginal pricing. That's what they're called. And constraints play a big role with transmission costs. As you can see on the right-hand side, we see different pricing throughout Texas, throughout the ERCOT region.
So what does this mean for us?
What does that mean for us? That the LMPs, the locational marginal pricing, will be different in different nodes. So some of the generation that we have is here in Bronzeville, but some of the other generation that is in a different location will have a different price.
Well, right, but is that price higher or lower?
It
Well,
depends.
it
This,
depends.
this changes real time.
Yeah.
You can actually see this exact map on ERCOT's website,
This
but this is a constantly updated graph.
is every 15 minutes, you have a price change. And you have those hubs, those points are hubs at the end of the day. So different points, different hubs, different prices. And every 15 minutes, it's updated.
So it's
It's
not
something-
necessarily a bias one way or the other. It's
It's not necessarily a what?
a bias one way or the other. Like,
Oh,
No, no, no.
No.
No,
no,
actually,
we
okay.
tend to,
Okay.
during the summer, we tend to have slightly lower prices, I've noticed.
Yeah.
But that just seems to be every time I've checked it. I don't know if that's a little dumb.
Yeah,
Lean, it's being dictated because it's being dictated by or because
Demand.
price changes, demand.
yeah, it's demand, it's supply versus demand. That plays a factor on the SCED mathematical system that they have, as well as any type of constraints or generation limitation. Those are the three items they look at. Is there enough generation to cover demand versus supply? Pretty much. And then the other thing is constraints. Any transmission constraints is probably gonna hike up the price.
That's actually an important factor. Transmission lines can only handle a certain power load. All the various, transformers, can also only handle so much power. So you can only transfer between systems, so much before you're limited,
So much,
mainly due to heat.
correct. So much electricity. So there's a limit depending on the
Which is
transmission.
why it's not uniform, why you see biases, especially, around the big cities during big heat load events. Like,
And I think to try to give you a better explanation on my part of it, I guess, is if we move to what will be slide number 17. So any generation that we produce has an auto price that because of the location that it's at. So we generate to the grid, but we also buy off the grid. So this particular graph will show you the difference. So this one, it will be at nodal price. However, we purchase energy from the south load zone price, which might be different. There might be a difference. There will be definitely a lot of hours, a differential. And that's explained a little more in detail on the complete presentation where it shows you the differential depends on an hour-to-hour basis. We don't have it here.
No, I think, I think the key takeaway from this particular slide is that location matters.
Yeah.
In other words, your load is charged based on this south load zone price. The revenue you receive, the credit you receive from generators is location specific. And so you have to make intelligent decisions on where exactly you place your generation resources. They don't necessarily have to be right next to your load. You could put them, further away, assuming you could site the plant there. So you have to kind of study it in that manner.
So the way we do it to try to, I guess, hedge some of the costs associated with electricity, because it doesn't matter where you put the generation, you're still not going to get your own electricity. So you generate, it goes into the grid. You buy it from the grid. It's not necessarily going to be your own generators, but however, if you have generation in place, you're going to receive some money for that generation, for that electricity. And that cost is going to be offsetted by the amount of cost that you will have to pay to get the electricity. You see what I mean?
Okay, so then having the generation does not mean that we get to access it directly. It
That is-
means only that we get to sell it.
That is correct, yes. And we were able to offset some of the price risks.
And that's
So then we
what
have to have
happened
that part
during,
expensive.
that's what happened during Winter Storm Uri. We had, our power plants running full bore, Silas Ray. And a lot of people didn't have power, and that was because ERCOT didn't let us sell it back to ourselves, use our own power. And what is the penalty, by the way? I've been meaning to ask that. If we said, what's the penalty if we ignored ERCOT and said, no, we're keeping our power local?
I don't think we can, but if we happen to not run our generation, if we're given an order, they ruck our units, they call it ruck. They demand for us to run our units and we don't run them, there will be there will be a penalty for sure. They'll bring in some regulators like Texas Reliability Entity and come and do an audit and find out the reason why you didn't run your units, even though you had the possibility to run them and you didn't assist the grid.
There's, yeah, I would be careful about that. There are enforcement provisions that are executed through the Public Utility Commission via the Texas Reliability Entity. And that's not something we want to do.
Okay, it's a real bad thing then. It's not like a.
It's one of just
Still as is, right now, there's not enough load for Texas. So imagine sending our energy to ERCOT, forget it. I mean, it would be a chaos.
Yes, yeah.
I think the key message here, I just wanted to reiterate though, and this is on slide 11, because it's relevant to what we just talked about, is that your choice for resources, for power supply resources is primarily an economic choice. It's not really a reliability choice. You know, we don't really get our own electricity. Our electricity is sold into the grid. We buy energy back from the grid. You could, in theory, have very little local generation and, you know, assuming the system could still handle it, you'll still receive power. But it could have dramatic economic consequences on the costs of customers. And so there's that balancing act, and that's really what we're trying to drive down.
Can I ask, so during jury, what would have happened if we did not have our power generation that we were selling to the grid?
It would have been
Okay.
more expensive for us.
Yeah.
Much more.
We,
It would, rather than losing $50 million, it would cost $100 million.
more than that, yeah.
Is that right?
We had some utilities go belly up pretty much.
It would have been catastrophic.
Would PUB have gone belly up?
Probably.
Yeah, billions. Yeah.
We would have been.
Instead of buying at, let's say, $10 per kilowatt hour, you would be buying at $10,000 per kilowatt hour. So imagine
Yeah.
needing 1 million kilowatt hours at $10,000.
So PUB wouldn't necessarily have gone belly up, but our customers would have had to pay the true price. So we
Which
subsidized
could
it.
probably not have happened, it's like
Oh,
in
it could have.
practical terms, no?
I mean,
What do you mean?
Like the ability to pay, would people have been able to pay?
Well, that's what happened to other utility providers. Their customers were not able to bear that cost. So it happened.
That's
Yeah, but
right,
They were getting $100,000 bills on apartments.
Right.
right. So to illustrate that a little bit, on this particular graph, which is slide number 16 on your presentation, it talks a little bit about what happened in Storm Uri. So you see on February 2021, this is like a backcast starting in April 2020. But you can see in February 2021 that prices per megawatt hour were as high as $9,000. Ever since that limit has changed, or did make some modifications to try to prevent this from happening again, and they changed the limit to 5,000 per megawatt hour. But back then it was 9,000, and that's the whole reason why per megawatt hour, that's the whole reason why a lot of utilities didn't make it, or they struggle with huge bills. And it was consecutive days. That's a good point. It was in like a couple of hours. It was actually day after day after day that they had to pay this. So power prices are volatile. They can change, and they normally range between, zero to what would you say, maybe $1,000. However, there are some extreme levels that are also shown in this graph. You can see that was Storm Uri right there.
They actually went and retroactively charged people for the electricity that they'd already used. So, you thought you were buying electricity off the grid. PB maybe thought they were buying electricity off the grid at, let's say, $20 a megawatt hour or something. They went back and said, no, you know what? You actually bought it at $10,000.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so the idea that this is now acceptable is something also to be concerned about when thinking about power supply strategies.
So it's not like in real time, PUB can look at how much it's buying prices and alert consumers of this.
Well,
It-
for the most part, yes, but the prices are, I mean, it's a very transparent market. This was an anomaly, but we don't change our rates for our consumers on a daily or, you know, hourly basis. We set our fuel purchase charge on a monthly basis. And even now, we only adjust it to a max. PUB policy is what, 10%?
20.
20% max adjustment, or not to say that it can't be adjusted more than that, but BPUB policy at this point is only adjusted by 20. So you won't, a customer wouldn't be paying one price one day and then another price the next day if there was a spike in the price. What you would see is an adjustment over time to as an under collection or an over collection to try and make up the difference, either positive or negative from your customer.
Okay.
Rate base.
Yeah, that's correct.
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Sure.
The one with the prices for, what's the difference between the Henry Hub gas price and the ERCOT price?
Okay, so the Henry Hub gas and the other one's power. One of them is the prices in terms of gas, and I think you, on the left-hand side, you'll see the natural gas prices. They reach up to $10, usually, that it sustains around that area. And then the blue, is the actual power price.
Okay. The energy created in Texas is guided by Henry Hub or in Texas anywhere. So that's the base, right? So you have to guide yourself through Henry Hub to realize where you're at. Now, this, BPUB is different as mentioned because they're the three entities. But other entities are just the transfer TDSP, the distribution service provider, and some other just the utility. So it's why they're guiding themselves for that level.
Right. And just so you know, for the incident, the URI incident in this case, we saw prices as high as $400 for MMBtu.
Yeah.
So that's a complete, abnormality for us.
So the other thing to note, and man, it would have been nice to really zoom in on that blue line. But when prices last summer were sky high and everybody was fairly upset with good reason about how high electricity prices were. Well, they derived, and you can see from that red line there. Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
something we talk about often in our board meetings.
And they were pretty high. Yeah, they were around the $10 range at one point. That's correct. Okay, so the next item I wanted to, the next, I guess, slide I want to cover with you is our generation fleet, or what we call our portfolio. Currently, we are pretty much in good shape. We have sufficient supply to cover our demand, but there's going to be a change in a few years. Silas Ray Unit 6 is, it continues to age, and there are some contracts that will be expiring in a few years. So that's the whole reason that we are here today, currently analyzing our options and preparing our power supply strategy. I think, Len, you were going to make some comments.
Sure. So just to wrap up, and again, we would be happy to answer any questions you have on what we've already covered or any of the other slides in the deck. But to wrap this up, we have engaged with management and staff through a series of workshops that started last fall and went into this past spring, augmented by some pretty heavy lifting in terms of analysis. And internally, we developed this five-point strategy. Number one is to make sure we, needless to say, avoid risky investments. We need to right size everything, make sure we don't overbuild, and just kind of incrementally, unless there's a really compelling reason to make a large bet, be careful as we go. We want to give preference to resources having costs that can be effectively hedged. So a natural gas plant, you can hedge those costs pretty effectively, for example. We also want to be mindful of the potential for physical natural gas delivery disruptions. So we do have problems, or we have had problems periodically in the past of actually getting physical natural gas to Silas Ray. That's gotten better, but it's still something we need to be mindful about. So we want to make sure we're paying attention to that risk exposure. Number four, we want to give preference to resources that can help shield BPUB from potentially increasing ancillary service costs. So there are multiple forms of costs that you incur, and ERCOT's evolving in a way where some of those ancillary service costs are growing pretty rapidly. So we need to make sure we cover that. And there's also some new ERCOT protocol changes. An example of that would be what's called the Performance Credit Mechanism, PCM, and that will have impact on your, it's basically a form of an ancillary service cost essentially. And then lastly, we think it makes sense to kind of allow for time, our back is not against the wall right now. We have a little bit of time, not a lot of time, but let's allow technology to continue to advance in accordance with prevailing expectations. And that allows us some time to be thoughtful about that next larger resource we need. And through that process, potentially explore a multi-utility project if that seems appropriate. So that's the baseline strategy. It's really a start. It's not the finish. We teed this up for discussion with you. And so that's where it sits at this point.
More detail will be covered during closed session since a lot of this is considered confidential information. So we'll cover more detail as to what has been analyzed and some recommendations that we've developed so far. But we're still pending, of course, feedback from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very
Actually,
informative.
I have one question. So like financially, how are we to cover this strategy?
I'm sorry. Repeat the question.
Financially, how are we to cover this strategy?
Financially, I mean, in terms of what our resources are to cover it,
Right.
I think that's more question
Yeah.
for Mike, but my understanding is resources are available depending on the strategy selected.
Yeah, so in essence, any new resources that will be required, we're either going to have to go out and issue debt to purchase, and then more than likely it's going to require some increased rates down the road. So that is one of the strategies that we're taking right now, is that we'll be seeking a cost of service study on the electric side. The last time that we had any increases in the electric side for growth was back in October of 2016. So it's already been a while. So we'll be conducting a cost of service study, and we'll take all these needs here into consideration.
Thank you.
Lena, one other thing, how many generation plants is PUB associated with right now?
We have, let me show you the slide right here. So we have Desert Sky Wind and Desert Sky Fix, which is a contract that we have with AEP. The details, I can cover them under closed session, I guess, in terms of when it's going to end and so on and so forth.
Thank you.
That's a contract. Yeah, but we have Sendero, that's a power purchase agreement. But in terms of plans, we have Silas Ray 10, Silas Ray 9, Silas Ray 6. That's at our Silas Ray plant that we have here, and we have Hidalgo. In terms of megawatts, it's roughly about 303 megawatts total.
So can you give us
Yes, go ahead.
can you give us an idea of how this pie chart would change with the new strategy?
I can, however, I will probably have to do it in
Okay.
the closed session.
Thank you.
I think that's, from what we've been told, we consider that part of a competitive strategy.
Okay.
We'll cover that in closed.
Thank you.
But one assumes that pie chart, no matter what, will be encompassing more power, basically. Yeah, because as Brownsville grows, there'll be more power. So even though the unit size is staying the same.
Bigger pie.
Yeah.
You always want multiple slices. I'll want diversification. Always.
There we go. Dr. Zamato, one of the things that we are going to be looking in closed session is the mix into our portfolio when some of those contracts come offline, and all of that is considered, as they mentioned, competitive strategy. This board adopted an update to the competitive strategy a few months back, and we do have it in your new board member orientation of what is considered open and public. And it's also part of your new orientation package where Mr. Falk is going to be covering the specific local government code that covers the competitive strategy. And that is what allows us to speak to this in closed session versus open. So and make sure that there is no other person out there that's going to try and the system. Sometimes you've seen things that nobody is on that node or load and people start trading and mixing different things. And you're like, wait a minute, we're the only ones here. How is the price changing so much? And so that's one of the reasons why we discuss these things in closed session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No other comments on this topic? Marilyn, we're moving over to item.
It will be up to the board if you want to decide the closed portion now or go move on to now the item that is on Resacas or
I think we do it open. We continue everything in open.
Let's do it open. Want to move into Resaca?
okay, Resacas. It is.
Moving to the Resaca, we ready? Where's Renee?
But not actually. They still haven't been all cleaned up, so I really don't.
So at this time, we do have Mr. Rene Mariscal. He has, at the request of the board for us to have a workshop and we'll be happy to answer any questions. This is, we do have new members. So for some of you, please excuse, this might be a little repetitive. And Rene, how much time would you allocate for Rene so that way he can gauge himself right now on this presentation?
Well, Renee's pretty efficient, I think.
I've got my stopwatch.
I would say let Renee go and see, when we.
Out of curiosity, what do you have on your stopwatch?
I haven't said it.
I think this is an incredibly important topic for the membership of this board and for this community. A lot of us, we've been watching this Resaca restoration program. We've been keeping up with it. We understand there's right now, single source of funding. But let's just start, Renee, with your presentation and see where it takes us.
Okay, very good. Off I go. Thank you, Chair, members of the board. Good afternoon. Rene Mariscal, I'm the Division Manager for Special Projects, Water, Wastewater Engineering and Planning. So I'm going to provide an overview. I'll skim through some of the slides. I know for some of you this is a bit old, but just for the new members, it's just some background, okay? And then I'll cover the topics where we're at now for a lot of these. In addition to that, I'm available to talk to any of you individually with a little more detail if needed. Okay. So Resaca Restoration Program, just overall program, we have a couple of projects that are ongoing now, and that's the Restore project and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers project. And I'll get into the detail with each of them. And then in addition to that, we have a new dredge crew. These are some FTEs that were approved in FY23 that we're in the process of bringing on board. The Restore project, it's a little more of a focus on flood damage reduction or drainage. Think of it as drainage in addition to water management control. And by that, I mean that there's some infrastructure improvements, gate valves, weirs that help with the management of the water in addition to drainage. So that's why it's a little more focused on flood damage reduction. However, it does have components of bank improvements and ecosystem restoration. But the primary focus of that project is more flood damage. And I'll get into that as we get into the slides. The core project, that's a little more ecosystem restoration focus. That's their primary focus with the core. And however, it does include dredging, which provides for water storage and management. It does include some infrastructure improvements, gate valves that also help with drainage for the city. And then the dredge crew number 2, that is essentially a crew will be focused on dredging. And so what does that help with? Again, drainage as we remove sediment. It provides for drainage, aids with city drainage, but then we're also incorporating we could incorporate some infrastructure, gate valves, weirs that can help with the storage as well. Restore focuses a little more on the town Resaca system. You see that down in this map at the bottom. That's the town Resaca system. That's where we've done the bulk of the work thus far. When we began dredging in 2013, we've been focusing on the town Resaca system. The core work, second bullet there, is a little more focused on Resaca de la Guerra and Resaca del Rancho Viejo. Those are the 2 larger systems that cut across the city. And so just want to differentiate those two projects. And then the dredge project, that literally, we're just beginning, we're in the planning phase. So that's really, open for discussion where we go with the second group. Benefits of the Resaca restoration, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with all the benefits here. Clearly, very important from a drainage standpoint. They're tied into a lot of the storm drains, not all of them, but a lot of them are tied into Resaca. So they definitely provide for that drainage capacity. They also provide for stormwater storage. Resaca de la Guerra specifically is, quite frankly, we used it yesterday and today. It provides for water to our water plant, has the ability to provide water to our water plant. So that Resaca in particular provides for that water storage, especially in times of drought, when we want to capture this, this additional surplus water that may be flowing down the river. It's a good opportunity as we dredge this Resaca to have that additional storage. As you dredge the Resacas, you're improving water quality. A lot of these Resacas essentially have silted in over the years. So the full of mud, full of sediment, debris, trash. By removing a lot of that, you improve the water quality. From an economic development standpoint, fresh water, and recreation ecotourism, having these better water quality Resacas, certainly help with the economic development. A lot of businesses, are along these Resacas. And then you have the Central Pacific flyways for migration of birds. This is a stopping point for a resting area for a lot of them. And then environmental benefits. As we get into environmental benefits, clearly there's some vegetation that you'll see as I talk about the core that are really unique to the Resacas. We're down to the last 1% of Resaca habitat. So very unique ecosystem as well. Challenges, I mentioned siltation, Resaca silting in. A lot of the Resacas now have anywhere from 2 to 7 feet of sediment accumulated. They vary from Resaca to Resaca. Dean Porter Park, we found some pockets there of about 9 feet of sediments. Pockets, but on average, maybe 6 feet, 5 feet. But they vary from Resaca to Resaca. But essentially, the sediment has been accumulating over the years. A lot of these Resacas have not been dredged, at least not to this level that we're at. A lot of individual Resacas, you've probably had homeowners or neighbors, take it upon themselves to dredge a little bit, but not to the level that we're moving forward with now. As a result of development, these Resacas, you develop around the Resacas, so you get some runoff into the Resaca, so additional siltation as a result of the development, whether it be urban or ag. And a lot of these Resacas are fragmented. In other words, you no longer have the natural system that you had in the past. A lot of them are fragmented, so that provides some challenges for habit for wildlife, transporting from Resaca to Resaca, and then a lot of pollutant nutrient enrichment. And by that we mean you have a lot of nice neighborhoods, a lot of pollution, not from the nice neighborhoods, but just in general. But nutrient enrichment, a lot of runoff now into these Resacas. Photos on the right, really quickly, up the upper right, that's a weir. That's when we talk about infrastructure improvements, that's essentially serves as a dam there. As you can see, this is an occasion when water levels were low, but nevertheless, that's the type of infrastructure that we're needing to improve to ensure for proper flow throughout the Resacas. That's just one example. There's various, and you'll see a few more. The second photo there, we'll, at least from an ecosystem restoration, we talk a lot about some invasive species, the Brazilian pepper tree, that's there. And then the photo on the bottom is just demonstrating a lot of the trash that we see along the Resacas. That's our dredge, and that auger, that's a lot of the plastics and trash that we're finding along the Resacas. So the measures that we're employing are listed here. We do dredging. We're not using them all. Some projects restore, again, focuses more. Right now, we're dredging some infrastructure. We were to continue to move forward with the ecosystem, with the core work, that's a little more ecosystem based. And then if we were to dredge, obviously we're generating additional capacity. Photos on the right, the one in the middle is just one of our pump stations. You'll see, this is a Resaca pump station. We have about 5 of these. They're not all that size, but nevertheless, we have about 5 of these throughout the city. And this is PUB, by the way. City of Brownsville has some additional pumps, but PUB, we have about 5 of these. So this is the infrastructure that we're talking about. Bottom right is a weir, essentially a dam. Literally what we do there is, and this is one that's managed by PUB, we're adding wooden boards. So we need to move away from that. And I'll talk a little bit more about this photo on the bottom right when we get into the town of Resaca improvements.
I just wanted to add by when he says we're moving wooden boards, it's 2 guys jump into the Resaca, they put in boards, they take them out, and that's how the water level goes between the 2 Resaca systems. So when we say we're doing Resaca improvements to the Resaca restoration program, we're actually making this a lot more automated to the other picture with pumping and other type of systems than just having a board that 2 people walk in there.
And then you'll see another photo or two on that. A little background with the Resaca, at least going back to 1999, clearly there's probably been some activity prior to that, but at least go back to the Resaca Restoration Program in 1999, the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, there was a resolution that was passed that allowed the Corps to begin a feasibility study, essentially. That was back in 99. And so during the period of about 2002 to 2009, the city actually was provided some funding to the Corps, some matching funding, where the Corps began some reconnaissance work. You do a reconnaissance before you get into feasibility, before you get into construction. So that's the early work, data collection, reconnaissance work in the early 2000s. I believe the city pitched in about a million, a little over $1 million, and the Corps matched that. So they began that work, reconnaissance work, data gathering, and quite frankly, the beginning of a feasibility study in the early 2000s. Unfortunately, the funding for the Corps ran out. I understand that shortly after Katrina, a lot of the Corps funding was focused on Katrina. So it died out in 2000, right around 2009, roughly. Excuse me. In 2009, I list the Imagine Brownsville Comprehensive Plan, and I list that simply because that was a guide. This is a city plan, but that provided it on there. You'll see some language if you get into the environmental plan, some language on some of the restoration that was needed, that was being recommended by city staff back at that time, and frankly, it served as their guide early on, at least from an operational standpoint. It served as a guide for where we began, city cemetery and the town of Resaca system. 2011 is when we actually began the creation of the department, and then by 2013 we go with dredging. 2011, 2012. We began to create the department, started to buy equipment. Everything here at this point was self-funded.
So by self-funded, that means the water rates were capturing the costs. And that's the very important thing, because the last study that Mike can talk a little bit more is, the Resaca fee helps pay for itself. And it's a standalone, like a 4th utility system that's being run, the Resaca system. And we'll have more information towards the back on that Mike will cover.
The initial Resaca segments, again, this is between 2013, 2016 roughly, are within the town Resaca system. And those are the ones that were completed upfront, the first few years, with what I'm calling our Crew 1 dredging. And you'll see that as I get into the town Resaca Restore project that's funded by the state, the area that's not highlighted is where we're at. Those first few segments, about 156 cubic yards. Photos on the right depict all the trash, over 200 tires in that first segment at Cemetery of Resaca that we pulled out of there. Bottom right, we resorted to some divers where we began dredging at Gladys Porter's. The dredges that we have were too large for that area. So we resorted to divers early on.
This is the town Resaca project?
Yeah, all this is it's not the project, this is just what we did up front before we get in. It's part of the town of Resaca dredging, but not the Restore dredging that
This was internally funded.
Yeah.
Right? So this is all covered through PUB ratepayers. So yeah, this is before anything else is kicked
That's in
off.
2013. And who owns these, the sectors?
Who owns? So the state,
City. City of Brownsville owns it, just like the city of Brownsville owns, PUB, the water, wastewater, and electric system. The city of Brownsville owns the Versaka systems. Well, the individual we're talking about now, responsibility of the maintenance, of course, the individual landowners as well behind. And so it depends on, some of these here, there were city property that we were dredging.
But some of it is also.
Private.
Individually.
Yes.
Rene, quick question. Those 156,000 cubic yards, that's since 2013? When the.
yeah, that's there between 2013 and 2016.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
and you'll see some updated numbers here next, but go
but
ahead.
really, so that, the bulk of that, those 156,000 cubic yards was over the course of 3 years? Would you say
Correct.
That's fair. So approximately 50,000 cubic yards a year.
Yeah, and it definitely wasn't like a steady.
Yeah, no, I know.
Sure.
I'm just trying to understand ballpark, how long it takes to dredge. You know, if we said 1,000 cubic yards, a week, that's what we averaged if we were dredging from 2013.
And I will add that during that period, there was a period there where we essentially, we slowed down.
Okay.
We, as a
I'm
result,
trying to get
Yeah.
a metric on what a dredge team
can dredge.
generates, you know, what the metric is per week or per month or per year.
So now to help this, help put this in terms that I think more people can understand, how much roughly is 1,000 cubic yards? There we go. I said you.
There you go.
There you go. Almost like we had a slide that was.
Knew what was coming. And so back to the, Mr. Sampaio, 156 was upfront, the initial segments, and then ongoing now, we have an additional 46. So our total has increased. But just to, Dr. Holman, 202, the total that we've dredged thus far is about 40 million gallons, 40.9 million gallons dredged thus far. Okay? And again, something to point out that Rio Grande, we provide the water to the Resakas, but we're one of the entities that provide the bulk of the water to the Resakas. You also have irrigation districts, for example, on the far east side that also provide water to some Resakas. And then on the northern side, another irrigation district. But the bulk of the city of Brownsville, we provide that water. And so what we use is a permit, a surplus permit to be able to provide this water. So essentially, we're capturing some of the water that would otherwise, obviously, the more storage we have, that would otherwise just run down to the Gulf.
So couple questions, 41 million gallons of water added, to our Resaca systems. Do we have an equivalent number of, storage tanks that would be?
Go ahead. About
2 million each? Okay, so, 41, okay, so 20 tanks, más o menos, 21, let's round up. Okay.
I'll bring my calculator. Yeah.
And just a quick question. Where do we put the sediment that gets removed?
Yeah, the sediment that's removed is hauled off to the city, a location that we have adjacent to the city landfill, where we allow it to dry. And then we run tests and the city of Brownsville uses that sediment for landfill cover. After we run tests, all this is authorized, via the state. So we haul it off, literally adjacent to the landfill. We have, there's a property there, provide additional drying and run analytical tests and get it. It's used for what's called alternative daily cover at the landfill.
So that's used to cover every day, the new trash.
That's used to cover
dumped
trash.
there and
What's happens is we provide quite a bit. So it's not essentially.
Yeah, it's not every day,
Yeah.
but the idea is they're required if the landfill to
Right.
cover the trash.
It's used for, yeah.
So to sell it?
Early on, we looked at, really early on, we looked at, attempts and, whether or not the quality of the sediment would be feasible for other, construction or other means. But literally, at that point, we found that using it for the city landfill was probably the best option at that point.
So just to give you an idea, you can see the number of trash that we picked up through there. I mean, there's been batteries have been picked out, people put a lot of other contaminants. And so when some of this soil potentially is contaminated because of the fact, and you also remember that this is also part of the storm drainage system. You had a lot of oil that kind of goes into there. So when you look into that, it's not like it maybe look like soil, but there might be, and that's why the testing is required, at the site, but it actually is in a way good for us to be putting at the landfill. The landfill is helping them maintain their
That works
management.
for both groups. Very.
Yeah, it's definitely beneficial for.
I have
Funny side story, in 1960s, St. Joe actually dredged its Resaca. And they actually built up a whole flat spot right by St. Joe, using the dredge material. Just heard that from my neighbor.
So what you saw,
One quick comment, regarding the question of how many storage tanks, estimated. I think it would be interesting to, see what the equivalent cost would be for us to have that, versus, what we're spending on the Resaca restoration, right? Just to see kind of an ROI, comparison.
But
We-
there's a difference there in that our storage tanks are potable water
Correct.
storage tanks. Usually you don't store raw water in storage tanks. You would use land or just, what are the reservoirs?
Reservoir.
So that, but I do agree with that. That'd be interesting to say, well, the equivalent, not so much in storage tanks because it's potable water, but as far as reservoirs, what's the equivalent cost if you were going to generate the same amount of storage by expanding a reservoir, which is more similar to the Resaca, right?
Yeah.
Because it's open to the elements and to evaporation.
no,
Another interesting number might be, how much would it cost to buy this? So, how, water rights wise.
water rights.
We pull all or 75% roughly of our water from the river. What does that cost?
We do have water rights costs at about 900, I think, right now, and in class, it depends on the class, and we charge for water rights or our development of 2250. Is that what it is for municipal use? You probably know the numbers on the top of the head. We'll get back to you and give you those costs, what it is.
And the reason I ask obviously is to, make the case for it, right, with the community, right? So whatever the true comparison is, whether it's water from the river or extending the reservoir, I think it would be helpful just for a normal person to understand, why we're investing in the Resacas, and how that's helping PUB and how ultimately it's helping them, right? How do they see that value?
Sure. And it's similarly, like from flooding as well, for example.
Correct.
Being able to capture that. So noted, we'll.
You
Yeah,
tell
you
us-
can take a look at that later and.
Could you also tell us about, for example, this, was it 40 million gallons, 41?
I just round up.
Like what does that mean for flood control?
Yeah,
I know it's a hard question.
no, but definitely, I mean, we could certainly get, I can get with city folks and look at it from a drainage standpoint. And maybe, I'm not too familiar with the drainage numbers, but yeah, how does that help alleviate some of that drainage? For sure.
Right.
So the work that I just pointed out, those first segments, that's all work done prior to this project. It's still within the town of Resaca system, but now we're looking at a project that was state funded. Okay, so this is town of Resaca Watershed Restoration Project. This is ongoing now. This was funding as a result of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill back in 2010. This is, again, state funded via the U.S. Treasury. The state, U.S. Treasury funded, the state administers, it manages the project. So what we applied back in, I believe it was 2016 or so. It was, we phased it out over 4 years. 4 phases over 9 years. For our phase one, that we requested $4.6 million and we were awarded that $4.6 million. And I'll touch on that. Our phase one covers it's a 2-year period. We're actually in the second year, beginning that second year period of that effort. At scope, dredging, that's where our crew 1 is now. They're dredging now, and you'll see that we're moving along. And then there's also some bank improvements. Bank improvements, and by bank improvements is essentially resloping some of the banks, adding vegetation, and you do that to ensure that you keep runoff, erosion. Here we dredge, we want to protect that investment so that you don't get that erosion and sediment back into the Resakas. And then some weirs, gate valves, so that it helps with, again, water management control and flooding, be able to control some of that. So again, grant awarded in 2020. It took us a couple of years, some requirements. They wanted us to create a work plan, some environmental permitting. So we literally received the notification to move forward in 2022. So there was a little bit of a delay, 2-year period. And then same thing with the infrastructure, bank improvements, received the notice to proceed with that in 2022. And for the infrastructure bank improvements, I want to point out that that's something we contracted out. And that began again in 2022.
So these bank improvements, because this is all inside, the city, are these being done to private homeowners' land or private land?
In this particular case, with this Restore project, our scope, it's essentially along the peninsula that's out there. And in that case, it is within privately owned property.
Could you show us on the map? Sorry.
Yes.
Tell us where.
I think, yes, I do have a map here. And I'll,
Or is that the blue?
it's the green there in this particular map. So it's around the peninsula there around the high school. That's, you see the
high
green,
school
those
is
are the
it?
proposed bank restorations. So it's resloping there. And the reason you do that there is because you do have that ability where other areas you have retaining walls. In this particular area, there are no retaining walls, and you have that opportunity to be able to reslope those banks.
And that did not require fee simple transfer.
With the town of Saca project, again, U.S. Treasury, state funded, does not require fee simple.
Just an agreement with the land.
An agreement with the landowners, correct. Whereas, and we'll talk about core where that's a little different. This is just a layout. These numbers are old, but just wanted to show y'all what we proposed back in 2016, actually 2017, when this was broken down. This is how we phased it out. That's how we phased out Restore. We're right now just in phase 1. The 4.6. Originally, I was asked a question about the match. So we provided that amount as just for leveraging. One of the things we were informed early on when applying was clearly if you leverage, if you match a project, it'll certainly provides for greater application, greater opportunity to be able to receive the funding. And that's how we laid out that matching. Unlike the core, where the core has a very specific, it's a 65-35% match. This is how we laid this out with that we said we would be able to leverage. Now, when we received that award, is when we found that we were informed, no need to leverage for phase 1. So, and for each of the next phases, we have to go back and apply. These are not, I'll make that very clear, these are not guaranteed. We have to go back and apply it. And quite frankly, we would, because we'd have to look at the pricing again. Obviously, these are 2017 numbers. Things are a little different. Not only that, some of the scope within some of these phases has changed. Some of this involved, again, this is a partnership with the city of Brownsville. What we included in there were things such as Impala pump improvements, the lining of the canal, and some of this work is already underway. So we would definitely have to go back, and as we look, whenever they open up the opportunity for phase 2, we'll go back in there, revisit the numbers, revisit the scope, and adjust.
So what's the risk associated with this? I mean, so we're talking about, you apply, we're expecting a 3-year timeline, and then, 3-4 year. Well, I mean, I guess it's 2023. You applied in 2017. So this is a 6-year timeline after application, most months.
Yeah, and maybe it took that long because it was they were first starting off. So we're really hoping that that's condensed, that maybe a couple of years. I will tell you right now that just with phase one, our dredging, you'll see that we're about to finish that probably December, January timeframe, but the dredging, the design itself, the construction of those improvements and weirs, we're looking at, I think, at November 24. So we're still, phase one will carry us throughout FY '24, and you'll see some of the numbers here in a minute. But back to your question, as we've asked here recently, we asked the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, hey, how's it looking for, the phase two? That literally told us it's not a discussion at this point. In other words, not just for us, but for anybody. They're not looking, they're still trying to have folks finish their first set of projects. And you'll see that even with the first set of projects, just like we applied back in 2016, 17, that a lot of these projects are going back, just like we are, and requesting amendments to the projects, increase in budgets, because the costs have increased over the years. So it may be a couple of years before potentially we get to the second phase.
Okay, so just, so it's said in public, there is a possibility that, we will have a pause in work, despite the fact that we will still be probably collecting fees for the future work.
Specifically for Restore, there is definitely a possibility that phase two, we may not see that for a few years.
Okay, good.
Okay. Let's see, I covered everything here. So Restore, again, is focusing on the Town Resaca system. Let's see if we can see that. What we dredged early on was initially the light blue, and Restore is essentially this area right here. In addition to all these little dots, there's stormwater interceptors that are part of this project that are, help with drainage and help keep the water quality, capture sediment and trash and debris now that we've dredged there. And these are going essentially replacing storm drains that exist now.
What was the rationale for starting here?
The Town Resaca system is essentially the one that's probably the most populated. It's that entire system. And by Town Resaca system, I mean from about right here all the way down to the very end. It's within the downtown area. It probably has the most sediment accumulated. It's the earlier Resaca, developed a lot of development around it. So thus that, there was other criteria that was taken into account, but that was definitely part of that, to focus on this smaller system before moving on to the others.
And so phases 2 through 4
Yeah.
are for different sections of that.
Of this, yeah. But for the most part, phase two, just to give it, and I'll touch on that here in a little bit, would focus on the final upstream section. And then phase three would down here. Now, I will add that I understand there's some city work already potentially underway here. So I'll touch on that when we get to our second dredge crew. But nevertheless, the focus is to wrap up from a drainage standpoint, primarily look at complete the Town Resaca system. And Restore is what we're using for this effort, because the core focuses on the other two Resacas. This is as of here at the end of July, we're 70% complete, and we added the total material dredged. 46,000 cubic yards here.
Thank you, by the way, for that one. Now, I'm curious, you have 8 to 9 and 9 to 10 feet. Are you aware of any places in this Resaca, maybe the visualization just is cropped off? Were there any like 9 to 10 footer sections?
Not based off what we're seeing.
I was wondering if maybe we just lost some of the color because of compression, but no. Okay, just curious.
So 77% complete here. So you see the last portion that's left there, at least from a Restore standpoint, that's funding, Restore is funding, the dredging effort as well, in addition to other improvements. So back to the question, you'll notice here about the bank improvements. Look at all this vegetation around here. So this is what's being improved, again, because there's no retaining walls. Unlike around the other ends, you already have retaining walls, and thus this made it feasible for work there. This is just a drawing of, again, that there's some already work. The design is quite frankly complete for the bank improvements and the infrastructure improvements. I think they're, the contractor, the engineering firm is finalizing some environmental permitting before we move on to construction. So the construction portion of the bank improvements or weirs will go on through potentially November of 2024. Just a few photos when we talk about infrastructure. Photo on the left is just to show you some of the gate valves. This is a City of Brownsville gate valve, automated. And then here on the far right, some weirs where we're still, as Ms. Gilbert indicated, we're having to remove some wooden boards where we add boards. And there are a few locations like that. You saw this photo earlier, and there's probably a couple other locations. Not a lot of these, but nevertheless, we're definitely, moving to something a little more modern would definitely help with, flood damage reduction, with hurricanes being able to adjust, weirs a little better and faster. Just on the funding, just for Restore,
Quick question. Do you have pictures of the interceptors?
I don't have any here, but I could definitely get you some.
Yeah, sure.
The funding for Restore, our award was $4.6 billion. It's a reimbursement award. So we'll do the work, then we submit for reimbursement. 1.6 is what they've reimbursed thus far. I'm sorry, 1.2. So that and they're run like a month behind. We submit monthly, so there's a little bit of a delay here, but nevertheless.
Is it roughly about $400,000 a month that we're requesting?
Yeah, salaries. So, part we're looking at about 50 to about 80,000.
Oh, okay.
There was promoters.
Yeah.
So, and there is a portion that's non-reimbursable. So the project will cover, again, salaries, a lot of work, but there are some aspects, some costs that are non-reimbursable, some service work, some rental work that was not included in the original application that will cover ourselves. And by that, I mean, we'll be part of the SACA fee. You'll notice this portion, at least thus far, is funded by the SACA fee. Small portion. That's, again, wasn't included in the original application. So thus we're covering some of that. Estimated expenses pending, that's just the balance of what they've paid us thus far, and what's about $3 million. Oh, and here I do add that this $3 million does not include the 1.9 additional request. We just requested an additional 1.9 to Restore to U.S. Treasury via the state, an additional 1.9 because of the cost. The costs have increased as we applied. And so we're hoping we'll see, we'll hear hopefully the next several months whether or not. And it turns out that we're not the only ones. The other Restore projects, at least the feedback that we get from TCEQ staff is that there's, everybody's submitting these additional requests because the cost of material and labor have gone up. In summary, just for this project focuses primarily on the town to SACA system, whereas the others will focus on the others. This is U.S. Treasury grant. 4 phases. We have to apply for every phase. We are requesting for an additional $1 million amendment. The dredging here for this effort is being performed by us, by our Crew 1, not to be confused with the Crew 2 that I'll talk about here in a minute, but Crew 1. And then the design of infrastructure and bank improvements the design itself is being performed by a engineering firm, consulting engineering firm, and construction of the bank improvements will also go out for bids. We're not at that point yet, but that'll also go out for bids. And then the Restore project land to be improved, one of the questions you asked, does not require fee simple, unlike other, the core project. Okay.
Sorry, I'm going to ask a really quick question. Is this information all available on our website now?
I'm going to have to go back and look because we've been doing quite a bit of improvements. I know we added some links to various different feasibility studies and things, but I have not looked within the last few months where and what has been updated. I do know that we are in the process of obviously doing a lot of like a workshop. We're going to be uploading all of this presentation online and things of that nature. So I'll get back to you to find out exactly what's on there. And it's not, we plan to have like a power supply landing page. We plan to have a Resaca landing page as well, but I'll have to get back to you.
Will today's workshop presentation be available?
Yes, when I'm going to have to defer right now to our IT department if where the capabilities are, maybe Ms. Minor might be able to know.
So even if the backup information isn't necessarily posted, this at some point presentation will be.
Yes.
Also, I've been meaning to ask and I forgot, is this being streamed live right now? I know there was a little bit of a hiccup. We thought our previous meetings were.
So we're going to start live streaming at the regular board meeting, which will be August 14th.
Okay, and we're sure that'll happen.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay.
But not these meetings? Sorry.
Sorry?
Not workshops like this one?
This one will be, it's being recorded and will be uploaded as opposed to the next regular board meeting, which will be live streamed, recorded and uploaded, at least links so that people can find it.
Okay. We're in the process of updating our systems.
And there's access codes for people to appear telephonically for these as well. They're not being live streamed, but they're available.
Okay, moving on. The core work. Second project, no dredging underway yet. This is design at the design level and, waiting on funding, some funding for this, but let me dive into this. A little background, back in 2015, the city of Brownsville, in partnership with the city of Brownsville, a feasibility agreement was signed. Remember, back in the early 2000s, there was some early work that began back in the early 2000s. Well, it stopped for a while. We began dredging ourselves in 2013. The Corps came back, about that time, 14, and obviously saw what we were doing and they were ready to hop back on. Potentially there was some funding at that point. So in 2015, there was a cost share agreement signed to begin a study. And again, just a study. You go from reconnaissance to feasibility study and then on to design. And the feasibility study was a roughly $3 million study, 50-50 match. PUB, City of Brownsville pitched in the 1.5 million. And from that point on, at about 2015, the Corps forms what's called the project development team. That consists, because you begin meeting regularly at that point, and that consists of, PUB staff, city staff, and the Corps, primarily the Corps. We begin meeting initially monthly, and then you're down to biweekly. Public meetings are held early on. I think there was maybe a couple of public meetings held to talk about the project. And then ultimately feasibility report completed 2018 and the project makes it on to the America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018. This making it into that act essentially authorizes us to move forward with construction after design. But again, I'll touch on the fact that we're pending some core funding. Now, from the study, they develop what's called a National Ecosystem Restoration Plan. And the study, I know the study for sure is available via our website. And so if you look at that study on there, they've developed this National Ecosystem Restoration Plan for the Brownsville Resacas. And you notice the two Resacas there, they assessed all three, including the town Resaca system, but ultimately the Resaca de la Guerra and Resaca del Rancho Viejo are the ones that they recommended improvements because the town Resaca system essentially had already done a lot of dredging. And it was just, at that point, not a lot of vegetation, not a lot of bank improvements. For, again, focusing the Corps is a little more of an ecosystem restoration plan. There was not a lot of that opportunity down at the town Resaca area. So they recommended improvements for these two Resacas. These numbers are also from the study, from the feasibility study. At that time, it was an estimate of about $207 million early on, but now those numbers they recertify their cost every 5 years. So we're looking at about $311 million for the overall improvements. Resaca La Guerra, Resaca del Rancho Viejo. Of that, it's a 65% share. The Corps would be responsible for 65% of that. That's at $202 billion. And PUB, City of Brownsville, 35%.
Same scope, but a 50% increase in cost, plus or minus, from 200 to 300.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. And again, that's just the cost of, inflation, labor and so forth.
None of this money has been spent yet. So it wasn't, somebody went out and just bought the wrong thing or anything.
None of the money has been spent. The only money, the funds that have been spent for the Corps were the feasibility study
Right.
and the contract one design.
Yeah. So this is just
It's a budget.
a budget change because
Oh, yes.
price increases had nothing to do with what was done.
Right. Correct.
I think it's important to note that these are not PUB numbers. These are, the Army Corps numbers, and they're the ones that, let us know what, the project costs based on what they're seeing nationwide on various different projects. And so also the labor, as we all know, we're in an inflationary state and as a country. And so this is what they're projecting, what the new costs will be. And they delivered the information back to us in December 22. We went before the city commission and subsequently a few months later and, let them know that this had happened.
So our share went from 65 million, again, more or less, to 100 and.
Correct. So background, after the study, in 2021, there was a project management plan that was signed. And this is, City of Brownsville and the Corps, obviously with PUB as partnerships. And you sign a project management plan that essentially oversees, it talks about, the project in general for contract one. And again, I'm focusing on contract one here. There's 16 contracts. That 311 million would be phased out over 16 contracts. This is focusing solely on contract one. A project management plan was executed in March 5th, and then a design agreement on the 26th of March. And at that point, we began the design. And again, the project development team, which consists of the Corps, PUB, city staff, off we go with the design. The cost for the design was about $2 million. And that, if you notice there, that again, those cost estimate were generated by the Corps. And of that $2 million, our share, the 35%, was about $728,000. Those were paid back at that time, and roughly in 2021. Contract one, what we're looking at, contract one are these three segments. Down at the southmost area, the Resaca segment, what we call 72 by the Morningside Park. One in the center, Resaca 93, Jagu, Resaca, La Posada, Montezuma Cypress area. And then Resaca 94 is essentially right now just a drainage ditch. So some of the infrastructure that I include there, so the proposed work there are some bank improvements along the Resaca 72. On 93, some excavation. It's dry now. So it's some excavation and removing of a lot of invasive vegetation that's down there, adding some natives. And then for Resaca 94, just adding some vegetation along that ditch, essentially having that continuation of that Resaca. In addition to that, a pump is being proposed here to have the ability to pump from this segment down from 72 onto 93. So that's some of the infrastructure. A weir located here to help manage water levels as well. So infrastructure, ecosystem for the Corps project, for contract one. The breakdown of the estimates for construction, again, we're not there yet, but the estimates are about 3.1 million. This has not been bid out, so clearly that could change. If you break that down to 65-35 share, our portion would be about $1 million, a little over $1 million. The approximate construction completion for that is about 14 months. That won't occur until a project partnership is executed between the city and the Corps. Just a few photos of the Resaca banks there at what we call Jagur Resaca at the Monte La Posada area. And bank improvements,
Which one is dry now?
yeah, you do see water there. So we do add water. We have the ability to add water there via the Brownsville Irrigation District. We don't have, like PUB has a pump to be able to add water. So some of the photos here were taken during when we added water. It's very likely dry right now. So we'll add water occasionally there. It's many years ago, the irrigation district would add water there regularly, but at some point they discontinued adding water. So it's been probably years. Here recently, we began adding, we purchased the water from the irrigation district and we'll add water there more than anything for some of the Montezuma cypress trees.
So you're saying right now, we buy the water from the irrigation district and have them then put it into the.
There's a valve, there's an infrastructure there where we would go in there, after we purchase the water and release some water in there. So right now,
We as a utility do this?
yes.
And I mean, I don't know the question about who owns it or who is responsible for maintaining this area. I don't know what the right question is, but I guess who is responsible for maintaining this area?
Sounds pretty good.
So a lot of the land there, a portion of that land is city-owned. There's a section there that's city-owned. And then obviously the residents along the Resaca, they own, essentially, they own the property. I know that's not answering your question directly. From a maintenance standpoint, we received the request to be able to, to add water. There was concerns with the cypress trees, so we assisted with that.
But that's a request from the city? Or who makes that request?
The request is, yes, from the city.
For City Brown?
City branch, yeah.
Okay.
For the water, yes.
Question, Brenda. So just to understand the way these contracts work, I think the Corps is the one that bids it out, correct?
The Corps
They
will do the bidding. For the
bidding.
most part, they're doing a lot of the design with our input, but then the Corps,
They bid it out.
they do the bidding.
If that number comes in higher than 3 million, is our contribution capped at the budget, or do we pay at whatever they end up, bidding it out?
It's my understanding that whatever the cost
Whatever
is,
it's
we're at
Okay. So,
65-35.
Okay.
Goes up, we pay more,
Great.
drops down.
yeah, I just wanted to, given that it's not in our hands, I just wanted to
Sure.
understand that risk, right? If they bid it out and it comes in and it's twice as expensive,
Sure.
we're on the hook for twice as much.
Yes. So with the Corps moving forward, they're at 95% design. That's essentially done, right? And so we're waiting on funding. You see the last bullet that there for the Corps needs some funding. We're our share, but from the Corps standpoint, they're waiting on some congressional funding so that they have their 65% to move forward with this.
So now, full disclosure, I got to see this in person and it was a wild experience. Can you talk a little bit about what a START means? And, the fact that this has actually been funded, I think and I'm not sure I can explain the whole thing, like it got funded in the, 2017 or so timeframe, but we're still waiting for the Corps to receive the START. It gets complicated.
Yes, it's for the Corps to, yeah, it does. So the Corps has to receive their funding via work plans and congressional funding. And so essentially for each of these contracts, we're going to have to work with the Corps, much like we've done, to ensure that they receive the funding, their 65% share, so that we can continue to move forward. We've literally been doing that from the study. I mean, we visit with them regularly, and at least on an annual basis, we're out there, ensuring that, hey, even for the study, we need this, and for the design. So it's definitely been some work along the way. Now, one thing that that I am told is that getting past this new start designation, once they receive this funding for a new start, it may make things a little smoother because you're underway with construction. But again, it does not guarantee that every year you're going to be receiving funding.
This is important because the federal government doesn't really do contracts, as somebody who's worked with them, beyond a year timeframe. And so whatever we start running at, tomorrow, let's say we get the check tomorrow, a year from now, we could be huffing and puffing in the federal government for all the reasons that they are so wise, could say, oh, nope, no money this year. Sorry, we're done. And through no fault of our own, but this is a risk when dealing with the federal government.
And like I mentioned earlier, Katrina was an example where funds shifted, to another project. So
I will say, we were with another governmental entity yesterday, and they were talking about federal funding, and specifically what was saying that they were 10 years in the making of when the request, and so finally the funding came through on certain things. So to give you that is just, when they say it's an act of Congress, it literally is an act of Congress, because they have to enact the budget to be able to funding to come through, and that's where we're at right now. We have the appropriations that we have there now, it's inside of the presidential budget, and so in November, we'll know if the funding is come in, and Renee has a couple of slides, I think, where the Congress letter is there, so.
For contract one.
Yes, for contract one. And then at the same time, we should be working on contract 2 and contract 3 because they're all should be moving at various different phases of the project. So just when we finish contract 1, 2 is in a different phase, and 3, and when all of this is rolling, 1, 2, and 3 are in various different phases. So it's going to take a lot of project managing of all of this. And at the same time, we have equipment purchases to do and things of that nature, and things that are upfront costs to be able to maintain some of these things and design and crews. And so, but I'll turn it back to Renee. I just wanted to clear that, yes, the funding is not secured because the federal government only works on a year-by-year basis.
And that's, I think, the thing that hit me the most about watching you. I was very impressed at the patience, the idea that, look, man, we got the thumbs up years ago, and we're still here every year, knocking on doors and saying, hey, you're educating junior staffers about this. I was very impressed watching you. So, yeah.
And my apologies, Mr. Mayor, you had some.
No, yeah, I just wanted to just ask the question. I know we received some one-time funding for Resaca recently, right? But I don't know if it's tied to this specific project or not.
The one-time funding letter that we received is for this, and Renee can talk a little bit more about that. Yes.
Yeah, so via our Congressman Vicente Gonzalez, they can request it. Our contract 1 was not in the Corps work plan. So as a result of that, our next opportunity was via the congressman. The congressman, they have certain projects within their community that they can request funding for. And so in order to qualify for that, as you see from the letter, there has to be community support. There has to be a viable project. So the congressman selected our project, among others. There was, I forget, maybe 12, 13 projects, don't quote me on that, but that were selected by the congressman for the community down here. Ours was one of them. And his request there was for a little over 2 million, and essentially for the Corps to be able to cover their portion. And this is where it's at. So this is what really we're waiting on. And this is just a rough timeline of where it's at. Merlin mentioned here December, hopefully it gets through the Senate and then it makes it onto the president's bill. And at that point, then we would be able to move forward. At that point, we would begin to sign an agreement, project partnership agreement, and begin the construction. If it gets past the Senate as well. Okay. It's looking favorable. I will have to have it. It's looking favorable.
Always in it.
I will add that this is a good time that we have reached out to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They are going to be at the Galveston office, and so we're in the process of potentially meeting with them and confirming some meeting times and date for the week of August 23rd, 24th, sometime timeframe when he's going to be in our state from D.C. So we're going to be meeting with a colonel at that time, and so we're securing those time frames there.
Yeah, it's looking favorable for that. In summary, for the core, again, this focuses on the two Resaca La Guerra, Resaca del Rancho Viejo. I primarily focus on ecosystem. There's a lot of ecosystem involved with the core project. Yes, there's some dredging, there's some water infrastructure improvements that will help with water management, but I just want to emphasize that this project is primarily ecosystem restoration. So over 16 contracts, we're just now working on contract 1. Just the design, I think I've mentioned this in the past, for contract 1 has taken us about 2 years, just the design. Construction, we'll see how long that takes us. Design and bidding are performed and managed by the Corps. They do the bidding, they do the design. Construction of improvements to be performed by private contractors. Again, it'll be bid out. And then we touched on this, it requires congressional funding per contract.
For 1-year contract.
Right. Every year.
Has to be. Okay, so this is primarily, as far as the core is concerned, an ecosystem restoration project. As far as PUB is concerned, can we reiterate the benefits that we get as a utility? Just because that as part of our charter is an important thing to make sure we state and we understand.
Let me begin with ecosystem restoration. By ecosystem restoration, they're after, vegetation, native vegetation. Yes, that's definitely ecosystem, wildlife, but even that ecosystem restoration, you're restoring banks, resloping banks. That's helping from an erosion standpoint, which is going to help, our Resacas keep them from filling in. And if you notice, you look at the plan, it's not every segment of Resaca, it's scattered, right? But nevertheless, it does help from when we talk about simply ecosystem, that's a benefit added to the city because it helps with erosion. In addition to that, I mentioned infrastructure. There's weirs, there's gate valves. Here on contract 1, we're adding a pump, right? Adding a pump, adding some weirs. That helps with water management. Gives us the ability to turn on pumps, lower levels, increase levels as needed. Drought, maybe we want to retain some water. Hurricanes, maybe we have that additional structure. And in some cases, more modern infrastructure, so all of that helps for the city standpoint.
Hopefully, in all cases, we get more modern infrastructure.
Yes.
There are definitely more efficient ways than having 2 people go into a stream and move boards.
And just to confirm, PUB is not actually doing any of the work here. It's all contractors. We're just really administering this grant or award
With the Corps,
with the Corps.
yeah, with the Corps, we're essentially myself and a couple of folks that sit on the design team. And that's really the extent. We provide input.
Yep.
They're pretty involved in the design. And once we get into further phases, bidding, construction, all that will be done by private contractor. And the Corps does the bidding.
So you've had the same contractor for the last several years on this, is that right?
With the Corps, there's no contractor at this point. It's just the Corps. With the Town Resaca project, the one we mentioned earlier, we do have a private contractor there that just hopped on in 22 with the restore. With the Corps, there's no private contractor involved thus far. Now, I will add that every now and then I think we have to go get a survey. So we'll reach out to a geotech company and help us with, as we're designing this. So no contractor involved just yet. A little bit on real estate. I'm not going to touch too much on this. Again, with real estate, it's much like the power plant, power supply. Some of that is, will be confidential, but just this is basic information. The real estate, the Corps does require that lands to be improved be fee simple. So essentially, that we have ownership. Us, City of Brownsville, PUB, the non-federal sponsor have ownership. And there, just some of the numbers for the study, as it stands, we're looking at about 646 real estate tracts to be improved, and there's the breakdown of the tracts. The land that is to be improved must be maintained for 75 years. That's just their core requirement.
Can you explain fee simple and what that really means as far as ownership?
Yep. Essentially, we have to have full ownership of that. That's what fee simple means. How do we acquire that? The process would be that you go out, make offers, if, and then if not, condemnation would be required. The non-federal sponsor would have to have ownership of the property to be improved.
There is an exception. My understanding is there is an exception there for the federal and state land, so.
There's some exceptions that we're still, discussing with the court. Now, as far, when you talk about exception, one of the questions that has been raised is whether or not a property owner would have access. And there's been some discussion that after the project is complete, we would then have those discussions with those private owners. But again, that's just preliminary, and we're still, as Ms. Gilbert mentioned, we'll be meeting with them just to clarify, get some information on some of them.
So, Mr. Sampaio, we do plan also to meet with the real estate department when we meet with the Galveston
Yep.
Division, just to reiterate some of the various things, what our different options are. I don't want to get into various different things in real estate, but we do have an item in schedule for close to consult with our attorney to discuss those strategies there.
Just a letter where, just essentially where they clarified that we not begin any work prior to signing a project partnership agreement, which we haven't yet, but after there's funding for the Corps, then we would move on to signing that project partnership agreement. But essentially, we would also be able to receive some credit, if we were to move forward, purchase land, acquire the land, there'd be credit for that. We did have.
That's not our plan, correct? We wouldn't be purchasing any land until, or going forward with anything until the project is approved and funded by the federal government.
That's correct. There's no, we don't move forward until the Corps receives their funding and an agreement is signed, a project partnership agreement is signed.
They have various different rules, and if there is some sort of a master agreement and like a memorandum of understanding, then depending on certain trigger points, and I don't have everything in front of me with the partnership agreement that happens with there, but the reality is we don't want to do anything without any approvals, and we have any type of a memorialized agreement in place.
Yeah, and clearly a project partnership agreement would be reviewed by, staff, board, and so forth. Before moving forward.
I have a quick question. Has this project ever been done in other parts of the United States? In terms of from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and this arrangement about acquiring fee simple interests along private property owners in order to do those improvements?
Yeah, that's, yeah.
It's a standard thing?
It's
or-
a standard, it's
Okay.
standard.
Just want to make sure. Sure.
Jesse Alvaro with our real estate area.
My name is Jesse Alfaro, the new real estate manager for the company. The corps, they do have a real estate guide that we have to follow. So it is done over the country, yes.
Okay. So it's mandatory.
It is mandatory, yes. There's also, they have, of course, the fee simple. They have 4 types of fee simple. One, including mineral rights. One, they can subordinate mineral rights. Also, they will exclude the mineral rights. And then, of course, the leases. We can go up to 75-year leases or 100-year leases or easements. So it all is listed here on the guide.
But leases aren't fee simple.
No, leases are not.
So that's an option,
Right.
potential option.
Yeah.
So that's
It's
something.
something that we can.
That's something new that we.
Yeah, but we hadn't heard.
Yeah, we haven't heard that.
And again, my understanding from the document that was published by the Army Corps When it comes to federal land and state lands, they do not require fee simple ownership. Because the government's not going to sell you their land. And the Texas Parks and Wildlife won't either. And in that case, it would be an agreement with them.
Exactly.
to-
We're gonna go one by one, Texas Park, which one last? We're gonna go one by one.
So there are exceptions to the fee simple acquisition.
That's correct.
And the lease has to be for 75 years? The
The,
lease?
but the project, the proposed project, what we discussed with them, needs to be up to 75 years. Yes.
It should match.
Okay,
So now I'm just going to say there is an asterisk to this, and it's only a very recent development, I think in the last year or two, where the Army Corps of Engineers did say in very, very specific circumstances, you are able to move forward without the simple acquisition of land. So I do hope we consider that when we discuss it with them.
I would reiterate that as well, because I think, I was part of the commission when the commission approved the Osaka fee that was going to be used for the 35% match on this project, right? And in the presentation to the commission, this is prior PUB management, not anyone here. It was never conveyed to the commission, and the slide that you showed us about the requirements of fee simple acquisition or condemnation was never brought up to the city commission when we approved that fee. So I think this is going to be a challenging thing to work through. Okay. And for the board's perspective, right? So I fully support this project because I think there's a lot of benefits, a lot of merits to it. But we really have to navigate this thing in coordination with the commission and being as transparent as possible with the public. I know there's been public meetings. The general public doesn't know about this.
Well, those public meetings were conducted in 2015.
Right.
Right. 8 years later, I think that's a very valid point. I wholeheartedly agree again with the mayor's comments on.
And I think also, and I don't know if this is off topic, but the Resaca fee that people are seeing on their bill, there's still confusion, right? Hey, I don't live on Resaca. Why am I paying this fee? Maybe we should be looking at rewording that fee because it is something greater than just Resaca rehabilitation, right? It's a water management fee or, I don't know.
Although we're not suggesting any action right now because.
No,
we
I'm
can't
just talking
suggest
about
any
it.
action.
I'm talking about it as something to discuss later on because I think that's an important point.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Great.
This is very important. Yes.
Thank you.
I just want to add something on the Resaca Boulevard project. We had to do with city property. The deed that was deeded from a corporation to the city of Brownsville, it was a defective, the title was defective. So we had to clear title. That was back in almost early 1900s. So we had to file eminent domain to clear title. So we did a citation by publication in the newspaper, and we filed an eminent domain to clear title. We had to have a clear title. Plus, we also we acquired the mineral rights from the church, from Villa Maria High School, and we obtained the mineral rights to be able to move forward with the project. So that was done. That was done back in 2018.
Okay. We touched on the community project funding support. The letter from, we received, these are the number of entities, the various entities that provided support with the congressman. So we had a meeting on this where we provided just some general information to all these entities that offered their support. So now on to Dredge Crew 2. This is really just looking at, I'm going to go through this fairly fast. We're almost done. You're almost done with me. We're going to go through this fairly here. This is just beginning the pre-planning stages, and really so that the board, so you all start, contemplating any thoughts and suggestions on our second Dredge Crew. And this is the division. You'll see here on the far right, the Resaca Maintenance Department. I separate the Crew 1 and the Crew 2. The Crew 2, this is the FTE, the positions that were approved in FY23. And so we've been slowly working on bringing them on board. it was six FTEs. I believe we've hired 3. Those 3 are, currently working with our first crew, doing some training. We still have 3 vacancies. So training is underway with our existing group. We started the equipment purchases for the second group. The dump truck was approved by the board last month. You may see a front loader this month. So that's still being discussed. And then there's some dredge pipe facilities and so forth for the dredging for that second crew. So dredge site selection and planning, we're very early on in that. Clearly any feedback, we welcome that. After dredge site selection, then there would be environmental permitting, and that's a process in itself. Potential sites, we talked about Town of Resaca system, a lot of this work. What's left, we mentioned upstream and downstream. On the upstream side, and keep in mind that that was part of our phase 2 for Town of Resaca with Restore. Well, as I mentioned earlier, if that does not materialize, that's clearly an opportunity for a dredge crew to go in there and begin that effort. So that's one potential site, really with the focus of, dredging this entire system, finishing this off so that from a drainage standpoint. A second potential is downstream, and a lot of settlement there. We estimate, this one down here, about 157,000 cubic yards. So that's just a rough estimate. But again, I believe there's some potential work by the city that might be underway down there. So again, just really more than anything, pointing out that wrapping up Town of Resaca system definitely would help. 2 other sites are reservoir. That's more now looking more from a storage standpoint. We know that has a lot of sediment, over 300,000 cubic yards. Clearly from a storage, drought, et cetera, that provides a lot of relief. Another site is located right here by our water plant 1. This is where we have an intake to our water plant 2. So that's another potential area. Again, early on, if you look at the core work, if that were to continue, the next sites outside of contract 1, contract 2 actually begins way upstream, Resaca del Rancho Viejo, with the core. That would be a potential site with them.
But a quick question, what's the, more or less, for this dredge crew 2, the 6 FTEs, what's the budget, more or less?
So they're included on our overall budget. I mean, as part of our overall system.
But if you had to guess, for those 6 full-time employees, 260, okay, so.
Yes.
Yeah, that was very good. Good guess.
I'm glad I didn't guess.
That is our budget and finance team back there. So.
Okay, and would you expect that crew with the equipment that we'd be purchasing, would we be able to accomplish, again, more or less the same amount of cubic yards that we discussed previously, that, 50,000 cubic yard per year number?
Our crew 1 is using our existing dewatering system, which
Okay.
is all those boxes and
Yeah.
and that, but our crew, and obviously that's a larger staff.
Yep.
That equipment requires, larger number. When we asked for 6 FTEs, we were looking at more of not that type of equipment, but more of a containment basin type dewatering system where you would just require a lot less staff. So to answer your question, I don't have the exact calculation for, the dredging quantity, but it would be a lot slower. It would definitely not be at the rate.
So slower.
Yeah, it'd be slower. It would be slower. With 6, we're looking at potentially a containment basin or the purchasing of dewatering bags where you pump into these dewatering bags.
Yeah.
In order to do that, for example, an area like down here, wherever you have land, you have that ability. You have the ability to be able to dewater in just a regular earthen berm containment base or dewatering bags. Clearly where we're at now, there's not a lot of room, so we resorted to the dewatering system.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
it'd be-
no,
yeah, it'd be at a slower rate.
For example, going to the reservoir, which is directly connected to our storage. And again, that somebody could clearly see the connection to how that impacts our supply. right? And our ratepayers could clearly see how that is benefiting the system. If we're looking at 300,000 cubic yards of sediment, you know, using that 50,000 cubic yards per year number, that would take 6 years. But you're saying this would
Well,
maybe be slower?
it depends on the location. Here at the reservoir, we have a lot more land.
Okay.
So we would be able to,
Go
you know,
faster.
yeah, potentially dredge a little faster.
So you're saying it's not the crews that really pace, it's the
The-
speed
the-
and the
the
amount of
locations.
stuff we can do on it.
Yeah, exactly. Right now, we're limited by
Oh,
boxes that we have. We have
Okay.
14 boxes. We dredge half a day.
Okay.
We fill up those boxes. Now, something like the reservoir, we're down here at Banco Morales, we have the ability, you know, to expand quite a bit more. So it really depends on the location.
The reason I point that out, and it kind of goes to Gerardo's point earlier, he's not here, but when he was saying, is there a way to compare one cost to the other? Those, you know, the entire Resaca Restoration Project, I think, was looking at something in the vicinity of 1 million to 1.5 million cubic yards of dredged material, right? Of additional storage space, somewhere in that range, I believe. I may be wrong, but that's a number that comes to mind. Well, this is 300,000 cubic yards, right? And this is something that we're on our own. And so it'd be, perhaps that would be a good place to start when we're trying to look at that comparison that Gerardo was speaking to, and saying, well, if, you know, we're not getting federal funds for this part, right? We're doing this on our own, this dredging.
Right.
And so if we dredge these 300,000 cubic yards,
Yes.
you know, what is the cost versus the more expensive, and to Joseph's point, it's more expensive to do the Resacas because of the location and the land and the access and all that. But I think that would help just to be able to
Have that comparison.
some comparison for the purposes of a ratepayer who, you know, steps forward and asks the question, how is this benefiting me as a ratepayer if I don't live on a Resaca that's being dredged, and being able to show the difference between dredging, for example, our reservoir, and getting that same storage capacity benefit versus getting the benefit of that storage capacity from dredging a Resaca. And again, I think it goes to the point that we made earlier. I think that information can be helpful going forward when it's being communicated to the community, and not only to the community, but to the ratepayers, which are ultimately putting that bill.
So again, just to reiterate, we're in the planning stages, so we're clearly, you know, open for any suggestions on moving forward with the second crew. Just a breakdown of dredging equipment. Our crew one, we talked about that, the watering system that we're using now, that's essentially reached, you know, we're greater than 10 years. So that's in the CIP. You'll see that about 4 million. And that's just a rough estimate, our last one that we purchased. An excavator, same thing. It's an excavator that's there with that first crew past 10 years. You'll see that in our budget. And then some of the other equipment for the second group. So overall, anticipated in FY '24, an equipment about $5 million. Some of the action items, moving forward, obviously, feedback from city commission and community, working with the impacted stakeholders. Earlier on, we received, I think from one of the commissioners, just where we were with habitat wildlife assessment. The Corps for contract one has done some preliminary work already. But we also reached out to the Texas Master Naturalists. Actually, they reached out to us and we accepted their invitation. They're doing some volunteer work out there at just contract one where they're, you know, participating in some of that habitat assessment. Volunteers go out there. There's a iNaturalist program where they add, you know, certified volunteers. They add some of that information. So we're moving forward on some of those action items. Another thing, just that we're going to increase a bit is our outreach. You know, continue to grow our outreach. As noted by the mayor, we definitely want to, you know, be able to do more of that, ensure that we communicate, that we're transparent and that we're communicating clearly to the community. So Junior Explorers, we're revisiting that at the moment and, looking at some activity there with the Gladys Porter Zoo as well and BISD.
By revisiting, you mean actively setting up the program to start in the fall?
Revisiting the program is our communications department has been tasked to work with various organizations out in the community to visit the program. What we found out and just talking with the communications PR person from the zoo was that they're still utilizing a lot of the flyers that was done from the old format. And I think some of the scouts are getting, I think she did mention they're getting some sort of a badge on there. That's not PUB or anything. That's Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts that are doing those type of things. And so we also learned that there was some signage that, some improvements that have been done out there that hadn't been. So we're evaluating some of those signage that need to be done. There was also, as you all know, the Children's Museum, there was a site that was there. So we're looking out in some of the things where we need to go and do some of the maintenance that should have been done throughout the years and making sure the community is aware of the things that PUB is involved in. So, and that's what the mayor has suggested. And thank you so much for a lot of the feedback they've given us. So.
Resaca fee, FY '24, just estimates here, what we've collected, 3.3. It's what 3.3 million. Fees expensed, and that goes tied back to some of those expenses from Restore and some other expenses that are not part of the Restore funding. We're up to about 409 million. Our balance from the fee thus far, 2.9 million. And then our anticipated revenue, and I'll pass it on to finance here for the next slide, is about 5.4 million that we anticipate for a total of about 8.3 roughly. Potential expenses for the program in FY '24, that 1.9 from Restore. Remember I mentioned we've requested an additional 1.9. Hopefully that we receive that 1.9 in FY '24 and we don't have to account for that. But in the event that we don't receive that 1.9, that 1.9 would cover the scope of work that we proposed in when we applied. At that point, if in fact the Restore would come back and say, nope, you're not receiving this 1.9, we would revisit our scope at that point. But we're including it here just so that you see it's a potential expense. Again, we're hoping we do get awarded that additional 1.9, and if not, we'll talk to the state about, maybe minimizing that scope of work since the cost from what we applied has increased significantly. If we were to move forward with the contract one, or if we receive that funding via that community project fund, that's our share. 1.0 million, 1,085,000 is our share. So that would be expensed in FY '24 according to schedule, maybe in the calendar year of '24. And then I included the dredging equipment that you saw earlier, about 5.5 million. So just potential expenses for FY '24 are about 8.5. Pass it on.
And sorry, and 1 million for the Corps of Engineers, that's only if in November it gets approved.
The 1.9 million?
Sorry. No.
Oh, yes, the 1 million. It's only if the Corps receives that funding. And if that 1 million, that's our share. The Corps would receive about 2 million for construction. Our share would be about 1 million.
And the Restore, that amendment, we'd know more about that by when? Or we'd have news on that amendment by when?
Yeah, that was just submitted maybe over the last several weeks, and it looks like they tell us it maybe a couple of months before we. Yeah.
So first quarter.
Now, just a little bit more about that amendment. If it doesn't get approved, we'll have to incur roughly a little bit over $1 million just in payroll alone that we're going to still have to cover under the fee.
But not the full 1
But not the full 1.9 if we scale back. So just wanted to put that out. So here real quick, I've got the last couple of slides here so we can wrap it up. We went ahead and developed a financial forecast for the Resaca program going all the way out to 2038, which is the last contract that will be awarded under the core grant. And so just a little bit of a background here, back in February of 2022.
Sorry, is that in our folders?
I'm sorry.
That the binder?
Yeah.
It's the final pages.
I just have
Yeah, we're on page 44.
closed meeting.
No,
Oh,
there
my-
was an
No,
updated
it's-
presentation. The
Resaca presentation.
presentations that were
Yeah.
sent
Oh, yeah.
last week.
It's
does
still
not include-
the same presentation that Rene was running through.
Oh, you guys
Yeah.
didn't have page 44.
It's not in your printed set.
Our apology that we had inadvertently, yeah,
Oh,
left out.
okay.
We should have sent out some additional emails out with that.
Okay, yeah, we apologize for that. We updated it with this new, after it was initially posted. So we were supposed to upload the new one. Obviously, we didn't, so I apologize for that. Wasn't printed out. Okay, I'm sorry. So we got the correct upload. Okay, so again, a little bit of a background. Back on in February of 2022, the VP board went ahead and approved a resolution with the new Resaca fees. It was then taken to the city commission, first reading in April of 22, and then second reading approved in May of 2022. The first fee here at $4.50 per customer per month was effective on June 1 of 2022. There were 4 subsequent increases that are part of the rate study, all coming into effect January 1st of subsequent years, all the way to 2026. This particular forecast does include the rate in 2026 of $12.50. There was a Scrivener's error. The resolution that was approved by our board did include the correct amount in 2026 at $12.50, but the ordinance that was taken to the city and approved by the city had an incorrect amount of $12. And so that Scrivener error is still subject to be taken care of. We'll need to follow up on that. But in regards to the forecast, we did go ahead and include the full $12.50. Now, for perspective, that 50 cents in 2026 would generate about $340,000 annually. So it is a substantial amount. On the, it is good to note here that the Resaca fee is considered gross revenue or meets the definition of gross revenue in accordance with the bond ordinance. And so it is subject to a 10% city transfer. So we do go ahead and back out the 10% city transfer from these calculations to arrive at a net amount that's available for the Resaca project.
So one path for reducing the fee is asking the city of Brownsville to consider this maybe not being net revenue, so that now all of a sudden we can reduce the fee by 10%. Have we talked to the city about that? Would they be open to?
I think that would be, on the table for sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
It's something to consider. Okay. Now, as far as the costs go, for the restore, we did break it down between restore and the core. The restore costs that are in here are coming straight off the cost of service study. Now, the cost of service study did take into account the numbers that were provided by TCEQ, that $41 or $42 million for that particular program. It also accounted for some additional funds being set aside for capital needs, considering the fact that the equipment about a 10-year lifespan. So it's the $5.5 million that was just reported by Rene. So it's got about an $830,000 figure incorporated each year for the next 10 years. It's part of the study that's being covered under the $2.50 per month under the restore. For the core cost, those are coming straight off of what was provided by the core. They've been updated with the escalation cost at $311 million. Now the restore.
These numbers are updated?
Yes, they are. So you'll see in the subsequent page where we end up at our share of $108 million all the way up through 2038. Good to point out as well is that the restore does not include any escalation costs. So we just heard right now in their reporting that we have an amendment out there for $1.9 million just in phase 1. And so any of those escalation costs for restore are not included in here.
Neither are obviously subsequent escalations to the.
Correct. And if the like the Corps is going to be looking at this every 5 years, we can anticipate some additional needs.
So this last increase of 50% was just off of the 5-year number?
Yeah. Yeah, that was through 2023, right? So and maybe in 2028, they'll come back. 22. So in 2027, they could come back and reevaluate those costs, and they're likely going to increase again. So it just keep that in mind. So the last thing in here, we do show the net cumulative effect of the revenues, the net revenues less the cost. And one of the things that we will point out here is that here by 2038, we can see that the revenues is not going to generate, the fees are not going to generate enough revenue to cover the entire cost. But if we follow the flow of what's been allocated, we'll be short $18 million by 2038. Right, so that would mean, looking at the footnotes here, that the Resaca fees, again, do not cover the full grant matching due to the escalations. And so therefore, the projects will need to be deferred to future periods to accommodate available funding. So just want to make that disclaimer out there. Now, I know there's been some concern about, we're accumulating some funds under this Resaca program, but it's also, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good thing. If we look here at, in 2027, under the core, we got $12.7 million. That's just a 35% share. So that translates to about a $36 million construction project that the core could issue. We don't generate that kind of money in 1 year. So it's always good to accumulate some funds and have those funds available when that opportunity presents itself. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves having to borrow from our capital improvement fund as a working capital upfront and then reimburse ourselves as we collect the fees, right? Or the court can come back and say, well, we don't have the funds available. We're going to have to scale it down, and we're only going to make $20 million available rather than the 36. And so it's something that we can work with. So in essence, what I'm saying is that it's not a bad thing to accumulate some of that fund, those fees going forward. But as we can see, because we've already exceeded the 10-year limit and some of that equipment, the watering system equipment, we will need to start purchasing that now rather than in 10 years. And so it's going to be using a significant portion of that revenue that's already been set aside. The last slide that I wanted to talk about in here is just to talk about some of the implications out there for rescinding the fee. Now one of the things to consider here, though, is part of the cost of service study. The costs associated with the Resaca program were separated from the base cost. And so with that said, the Resaca fees were then generated to recover all those Resaca costs. So if the fees were to be rescinded, then in essence, the Resaca operation would need to be abandoned. It would cease. The effect of that, of course, would be a reduction in workforce. Any people that we can absorb in other positions that are vacant, we will. But any other positions that we can't will need to go away. Those individuals will lose their jobs in essence. So another thing here is water storage, of course, will be diminished due to the additional silting of the Resacas. In essence, it will also reduce our diversification of water source, especially in high drought conditions. If we have that additional capacity in our Resacas, it'll definitely help the city because we'll be able to draw water from the Resacas, treat it, and provide it to our citizens. The last thing in here, of course, there will be the potential of increased flooding due to the reduced capacity levels in the Resacas. It's not a function of the PUB, it is a function of the city, but it does help their costs for the city. So that pretty much concludes the presentations. Any questions regarding the forecast or this particular slide?
This is an item under closed as well. So if there are any questions that or any discussion that could require legal input, we'll have an opportunity for that.
Right. All right, thank you.
It would be good, and this isn't a formal request since this isn't that type of meeting. Just to make sure that we are closely tracking what money we're taking in and decide at some point if we have collected too much money. Right. Which is a weird thing to talk about, but if it turns out we cover all our costs for the next 2 decades, which we're not at, we got to really evaluate where we are and what's going on, because, we do have to be responsible, with this one.
Yeah.
I think to that same point, I think rescinding, which is a word that you all used on the slide, is perhaps one extreme, right? But
Correct.
there may be multiple options from keeping it as it is with the escalations already built in. And then on the other extreme, having a complete precision of the fee, right? And so
Correct.
there could be pauses in those escalators. There could be suspension. There could be other options that I think should, again, be discussed and put on the table for the commission. If, as Joseph mentioned,
Right.
we see that we're in a position where we're holding more money than we think we need, given the approvals that are currently in place.
Exactly.
And so
Well,
if you can have milestones. Hey, Congress approved it. Great, keep it going. Congress denied it. Maybe we should reevaluate, right? Restore came through, Restore didn't. Something changed. I think it's not necessarily one track or the other, right? Keep it as it was implemented or get rid of it completely. We may want to be able to discuss and look at other options that can be placed on the table, because again, my understanding is that perhaps the information that was communicated initially didn't cover in detail everything that's now being discussed. And so not only the commission, but I think the community could benefit from us having other options available, again, in the event that things change as we're going forward.
Yeah, we'll be monitoring this particular program very closely. We'll keep the board and the commission abreast of any changes. Thank you.
Thank you.
So with this on the next steps, I know the city of Brownsville has requested a joint board of the two meetings, and our chair would be, absent the chair, the vice chair, we would call the meeting. And so we're looking at some potential dates. Oh, he's going to move to the gavel now. But with that in mind, I do want to request, I know there's no non-action item, but if the preference is for staff to make a similar presentation to the city commission, that's the recommendation, that we'll do that. If the recommendation is to call a joint meeting, we'll request and talk to the rest and mayor. And I know that we're trying to be more transparent and in providing information. And this is one of the reasons why we knew that this was important, to get all the details out of the history of the project for everybody to be on the same page. So open.
I think this was a great presentation. I think to Board Bio's point, adding those options or that ability to be flexible is important, because I don't think this is an all or nothing decision that needs to be made at the end of the day. But I think this is very informative, and I think it gives the history and the reasons why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, and if the wishes is to present this to the commission as part of the workshop at the city commission level, we can do it that way, and staff can go out and present this if that's the choosing, or a joint meeting. Please let me know what would it be.
A joint meeting would be good.
Yeah.
I know that was requested at one point to have a
Okay.
joint meeting.
Okay, so I would recommend after we meet with the court, because we'll have more information and to do that. And so we'll set it so tentatively, potentially it'll be sometime in September, probably after the September board meeting, if that's okay. And we'll get some dates, going for that as well. And we'll work with staff to get some dates potentially, and we'll convey that information back to the city manager. She can work with the cities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, well, I guess I'll take over for Art now. If that's it, we will.
We're not done. We have item number 2, and we have power supply.
Yeah, but isn't that closed?
For this item, yes.
Yeah, no, but
Could we move to address item number 2 after closed meeting and?
Yes, we can.
adjourn?
oh, I just have it in this order.
We can, is that the wishes of the board? Then we can, if that's okay, the chair, we can adjourn to closed session, and, after we come back, we'll take on item number 2, which is the training.
Well, I was just suggesting
I don't know.
Since
I think we should know.
Feel about that, but, yeah.
Yeah, also there's some feedback.
Yep. I'll move to that. Again, go up, continue out of order by leaving number 2, the end of the agenda and move, adjourn to the meeting.
So, Mr. Chair, now, see if you can read the two items for a closed meeting.
Okay, so I don't have the official thing to read.
I'll go ahead and read them.
Okay, at this time, the items on the agenda designated for closed meeting will be considered. If there is an approved motion to go into closed meeting, the listeners will be placed on hold until the board returns to open meeting. Discussion, the two items we're going to go over are discussion of BPB power supply strategy. And this is covered under section 551.086. And number 2 is possible discussion with council on the Resaca Restoration Program, section 551.071. And then we'll come back to open session.
Yeah, we need to ask for a motion to adjourn pursuant to those provisions.
I'll move to that effect.
I second.
All for?
Aye.
Anybody against?
Okay, we're moving out of executive session and no actions were taken. So now we are reconvening for our regular meeting. We still have item 2 on the agenda.
I move to table, item 2.
Second?
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. And now we have the option to close the meeting.
I move to adjourn.
No?
No? Second it.
I didn't hear the question. Yeah, I think with regards to this piece, they can motion to move out of and adjourn the meeting. So yes.
Excellent. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Yeah, hey.
Now.
Gavel, hombre. You're gonna be dreaming of it tonight.
Are you good? Video everywhere.